Welcome to the Author Your Life podcast, where you can write a new script for your life and become the hero of your story. I'm your host, David McRae. You are the author of your life. Let's get started.
All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
In my experience, there's no such thing as luck.
It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Author Your Life podcast. Today on the podcast, we have Ash Phillips. Ash is a rebel with a cause. He's an experienced consultant in branding and marketing and has run multiple businesses. His latest is the global community YENA. YENA stands for Young Entrepreneurs Networking Association and is a bootstrapped business which helps people everywhere to start and grow remarkable businesses. Ash is a regular guest speaker at events such as TEDx, as well as an award-winning mentor and advisor to startups. And he is now connecting people across the globe via the YENA community, with over 100 events a year. In today's interview, you will learn to be aware of your personal narcissism and how to work with it, how to turn from a generalist into a specialist, that you can turn anything into a quote-unquote real job, and the importance of staying connected with your mind and body to know when to work and when to rest. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy this exciting and interesting interview with Ash Phillips. Ash Phillips, welcome to the Author Your Life podcast.
Hey, how are you, David?
Good. So, Ash, I'd like to launch into more about you and how you've come to this place today, to this interview. And I'd like to begin by asking, why did you start a networking organization for young entrepreneurs?
It's a big question. How long have you got? Okay, so I think to explain this best, it probably warrants a bit of backstory. So I went to uni when I was 19. After not really understanding what I wanted to do when I was older. And that's probably not the best decision to make. I think that's a decision that lots of people get wrong. They go to uni because they feel like that's the best thing to do, something that maybe they feel is expected of them by family or friends, and the peer pressures, whether it's conscious or subconscious, pushes them to do it. But that's a large investment to make, even though it's not necessarily cash up front. It's a huge amount of debt to get into, and therefore isn't a decision that should be taken lightly. But nonetheless, I chose to go to uni. I think maybe just because the people in the college careers advisor service are very good salespeople, and they're very good at asking closed questions about what you're going to do at uni and not whether you want to go to uni. So yeah, inevitably, as I say, I ended up going and realized it wasn't for me. I'm not an academic. And this sounds humble braggy, but there's a reason I say this. I'm quite good at lots of things, which sounds like a very good problem to have, but it's a problem nonetheless because it means that you aren't specialized in any one thing, and it gives you lack of laser focus, which is annoying. I had a friend that I went to primary school with, and he always knew he wanted to be a doctor from when we were 4 years old. And he now is a GP in Australia. And that is something that makes me slightly jealous because I still don't know what I want to do when I'm older, and I'm 28 now. So all of that came to a head, and I realized that university wasn't really for me. And so I dropped out. And that sounds like a really scary big leap and a crazy jump to take. And lots of people will talk about their jumping out and dropout story. But I want to kind of put a bit of the glamorous side of that to rest for lots of people, because it's not. The reality is it's not necessarily just a jump out and a dropout situation. Most of the people that will have dropout stories will have actually deferred for 2 years. But that doesn't make the story any more glamorous, and so they'll leave that bit out. But I think it's important to leave it in because entrepreneurship is about informed risk, not just blind risk. So sometimes it is, but informed risk where you can get informed risk. So I obviously looked into what my plan B was. Not that I think you should necessarily have one, but I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I made that decision. Left uni, started my first business. And I'll rush through this bit. I know you said not to rush, but there's so much detail in this that we could be on this for 10 hours. But I started my first business, which was a creative agency. And it took me 3-4 years to figure out what the hell I was doing with my life and how to run a business. And most businesses fail in their first year. And so if most businesses fail in their first year and it took me 3-4 years to figure out what I was doing, that's a fundamental problem, not only for me, but for the economy as a whole and everybody that wants to start and grow a company and fulfill their potential. So all of that kind of added up. And then I was always going to networking events and meeting lots of other people because I had to. I was an owner manager. I had to go and do that for my business. You know that all too well. And so do lots of the people that we know do the same thing. There were most of the people in these events were much older than me. And that wasn't a problem from an age point of view. That's not necessarily the issue. And it's not necessarily why our community is geared around the next generation. It's actually because there was a cultural gap rather than an age gap. They were talking about retirement. They were talking about their kids. They were talking about their holidays. I don't know what retirement is. I couldn't afford a holiday, and I could barely look after myself, let alone children. So I couldn't have a conversation with these guys guys and women in such a deep way that I wanted to. Yeah, all of that added up, and I wanted to just find people like me. My friends never really understood what I was doing with this crazy journey. My parents probably never will. And so I thought, where are these people that are my age I can get on with? Culturally, they're the same sort of mindset as me. And if I can connect them, maybe we can help them grow better businesses faster and without spending that huge amount of stress and time and money that I did first time round. So, all of that kind of put into a melting pot. Ran the first YENA event 5 years ago now, as of 2 weeks ago, I think it was. It's crazy timing. I think about 5 or 6 people turned up. They enjoyed the event. Of whatever the event was, really, it was just us having a beer around a table and chatting. But I think they enjoyed it for the same reason I did, in the fact that they couldn't do that with their friends. They could have a beer with their friends, but they're never going to talk about in-depth things around their business and the small failures and the big wins and vice versa. So they all asked when the next one was. I had no idea, so I just said next month, and we've run them ever since. And so that's kind of how I almost accidentally got into do what I do today. Why I do it now has kind of blossomed into something a little bit more profound, which is the fact that I just want to help people. And it sounds a little bit hippie, but it's our company why, and I just want to help people build better businesses in better ways. Unfortunately, government support just isn't good enough, in my opinion. It might be free a lot of the time, but they don't understand the journey because they haven't been through it and they're not going through it themselves most of the time. Private support is generally, and I'm sure you can attest to this, very expensive, which is great, but a huge investment. So who's focused on that area in between? The people that are starting up, that are young, that don't have huge amounts of money to spend, but do want a better level of service that the government can't seem to provide. And so that's the gap we fill ourselves in. And that's what I do now for a living, is run that community and grow that.
Going back to earlier in your journey, Ash, and you were talking about this cursed blessing of being good at lots of different things. I'm sure a few people listening to that can resonate with that. They got straight A's at school and they've been good at lots of different subjects, but haven't really found what their thing is, and they've been put into perhaps the academic path of being a doctor or being a lawyer just because they've got 5 A's, not because they want to be a doctor, not because they want to be a lawyer. Do you have any advice on how you can take yourself from being a generalist and finding what your specialty is?
I think there's a great quote by Alan Watts, a philosopher, who says about, and I'm sure I'm paraphrasing because this is probably paraphrased from somebody else in turn, but it talks about, what would you do if money was no object? If you didn't have to work for money, and you didn't have to pay for anything and everything was delivered to you into your lap, then what would you do with the rest of your time? And that is a very good question to ask yourself to start getting you on the path to figuring out what you would do. And then at that point, lots of people will start to question, well, just because I enjoy that thing doesn't mean I can do it for a living. Well, the reality is you probably can, because that thing you enjoy, I would challenge people to name somebody who they idolize within that hobby or interest that they have, and they'll probably name someone. The reason they'll probably name someone is because that person is probably a professional at it. And the reason that person is probably a professional at it is because they also discovered they enjoyed doing it and applied themselves to turn that into a way to generate enough money to survive at the very least. But usually on top of that, because they enjoy it, they become very good at it. And because they become very good at it, they start to enjoy it even more. And aside from certain pressures they put on themselves. And that allows them to fulfill their ambition and deliver a much higher quality of work within that field than any other. People will hit a ceiling, generally speaking, in jobs and careers that they don't enjoy. And the reason for that is because they don't enjoy it. It's exactly the same for me at school. I got a couple of A's, B's, C's, D's, and it's no surprise that the results I got in the lessons I got the best results in were the lessons that I enjoyed, and the lessons that I got the poor results in were the lessons I didn't enjoy. And I'm sure you've seen that from the stuff that you've done with teaching previously, is that the kids do better in classes they enjoy. So my advice to those people who are a little bit lost or thinking about what they want to do with the rest of their lives is, first and foremost, before all of that, is just to, and I hate to try and almost sound like Gary Vee here, but is to be patient, is not to put pressure on yourself, because putting pressure on yourself is part of the issue. It doesn't solve the issue. You actually mentioned the words blessing and curse, and I use this a lot for ambitious minds. People who are ambitious are both have a blessing and a curse, because being incredibly ambitious and entrepreneurial generally means that, relatively speaking, you will achieve more than your peers. And as I say, that's relative because it depends on your definition of success. But generally speaking, in careers, for example, you'll achieve more than your peers because you want to, you're driven to. But the problem with being ambitious and entrepreneurial is that ambition and that drive never seems to go away. People are always striving for this thing called success, but once you achieve the thing that 12-year-old thought you would be happy at, 24-year-old isn't actually happy there, and so they think they want something greater. Reality is that self-awareness about this issue, about dealing with ambition and entrepreneurialism, is the key to that. So my first step is be patient. Second step is to be self-aware of this mindset that you have. Don't force yourself into it, and understand that you're always going to be seeking more, not necessarily materialistically more, but just more for progress. A want for more and a want for progress, regardless of what you do. And then the third tip, I think, especially if people are at a lost point, is just to unashamedly explore things they enjoy, things they love doing. If you are someone who enjoys writing, but you're also somebody who really enjoys sailing, and somebody who loves walking dogs, then do those things. Do them way more than you might originally have thought you should. And then find out which one ticks most of your boxes. And if two of them tick boxes equally, then be the guy who sails and then writes when he moors up, or be the person who takes loads of dogs on your boat, or writes about dogs after walking them. It's, you don't have to just do one thing. There are lots of people that are what one TEDx talk calls multi-potentialites. There are lots of people that are multi-potentialites, but the common denominator is they put too much stress on themselves, I think. So explore. And then I think the final step, which is me just putting my business hat on, is if you want to do that thing for a living, then figure out how to sell something. Lots of people focus on so many subtle nuances of business, but forget the fundamental aspect that running a company or whether that company is just yourself doing something, as opposed to, a 100-person organization or whatever. A business is selling something for more than it costs to deliver it. So if you are taking that dog for a walk and charging somebody £1 for that dog walk, then you're going to have to take a lot of dogs or do a lot of walks every single day to make a living from it. So actually figure out how much you think your time is worth, or you would want your time to be worth, and then divide that up by the amount of hours you are willing and or able to do that thing, and then come up with a figure and then try and see if you can sell it for that. Likelihood is that you might be able to walk that dog for £30 an hour. And if you can do that, then that's better than minimum wage by a good stretch. And people are hopefully starting to make some money out of something that they really, really love doing. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Oh yeah, in depth. I think there's a lot of things that people can pick out there to help them on their journey. For your journey, Ash, as you're exploring these things, you're trying to find your niche, you're trying to find your passion, as the cliche goes nowadays. What kept you motivated during all this time? Because you didn't necessarily have that thing of, yes, this is me, yes, this is what I want, that often motivates people. What was it for you that motivated you?
I think we touched on it a little bit, is the fact that it's just a want for progress. I don't really know, and if I could find that answer and definitively answer it, then I would put that in a book and sell it. But I've got an unquenchable thirst for learning, so I always want to know more. Slightly greedy, I think, but it's probably human nature. Then there's a want for sorry, just broke it. As I say, not more materialistically. Otherwise I would have sold a lot more of anything that I've had as a business previously. And I think that's a realization for myself, as my core values aren't necessarily driven by money. I used to think it was, but that's why I didn't do very well, because I didn't realize that. It's a want for impact. And I think, coming from a psychological angle, it's a want for legacy, personal gain. There's probably, well, certainly a certain level of narcissism in there, I think. Lots of CEOs have, some will openly admit to, some won't. And I don't know why, because we're all made up of certain stuff, right? There's nothing to be embarrassed about. And the fact that, any TV presenter naturally will probably be narcissistic in some way, shape, or form, because they like seeing themselves on TV. Anyone that gives a keynote speech is the same. Anyone that writes a book is probably the same, and so on. And so for me to be able to be at the center of something that is not unlike a cult is great.
You're really selling this, Ash.
So I think at the most basic level, the deepest level, I haven't sat with with a psychologist yet. I really should, but it's probably a want for more personally. It's probably a slight amount of selfishness that most people will have, but probably won't admit to. Then on top of that, there is the second why, I suppose, which is the want for helping others, because I didn't have that help, and so I feel really impassioned by the fact that everybody should get better help to get to where they want to be. Because naturally, if I can help more people start great companies that do incredible things that hopefully they don't have to, but hopefully might have a social purpose, then we can, in turn, I would hope, build a better world, which gets quite misworld, but as far as an answer goes, but that's really important to me. And then, it's just a natural, constant thirst for learning, for doing, and just constantly moving, and probably a little bit of undiagnosed ADHD in there for good measure. But yeah, we haven't had that test yet, so we'll figure that out at some point, I'm sure.
So let's talk about your cult a little bit more, the cult of YENA. How many cities are you in now with YENA?
That's a good question. I usually have to ask Abby that, and I'd like to think because I'm good at delegation, but actually because she's better at her job than I am. But we're in, the last count, 14 cities, I believe, which is mostly UK. but now includes Melbourne as a city. And just to briefly explain this to obviously the listeners or watchers, what we mean by cities that we're in. So YENA is a membership community that people join for value-added services. But as part of our, I suppose you could put two descriptions on this, as part of our sales funnel, if you will, if you want to be hardcore business about it, or as part of our social impact approach, both of which are very real things for us. It's not one marketed as the other and vice versa. They're both core aspects for us. We run free meetup events across these 14 cities. So these events are designed to be informal, where people can connect with each other without any cost, aside from the 2 hours they might spend at the event, where they can meet other people like them, get a real sense of belonging at the very core, find other people that they can really talk to in a deeper, more meaningful way around the stuff that we're talking about right now, around their purpose and their passion and their business, and more of a practical level, find suppliers and collaborators and business partners and people to sell to. Not that we expect them to do hardcore selling at the event, but you see what I mean. And we also make sure that each event's host organizes a speaker for that night too. So we have a fireside chat section where people can hear from usually experienced people within business, but actually often and sometimes even more powerful people that aren't too far ahead of where they are at the time. So it's more relative and they can understand the story. So they get access to that for free. And of course, our hope is that they really enjoy that experience. They want more from us, and therefore they inquire about the membership and join, which is now just £9 a month, which is, hopefully not too much of a step up from free. So that's what we mean by number of cities. So we run those events across 14 cities now. We run 8 events a year in each of those cities, thanks to our incredible hosts. And of course, Abby manages our events and operations. So we're doing over 100 events a year as a team of 2 people, plus our hosts, which sounds bonkers, but it's just a good testament to practice and adaptation out of necessity, basically. Yeah.
You mentioned some of the intentions for the event and people coming together, and I know I went to the Bristol events of YENA, and one of the things that really struck me was I always left on a high. I always felt that I'd been really energized and I'd fed off the enthusiasm of people in the room. And YENA wasn't the only networking event that I went to, but that was a very different feeling that I got compared to some of the other ones that I went to. Why do you think that is? Why has YENA created that kind of community with that kind of energy?
It's a really good question. I think there's a few aspects for it, and it's easy to take it for granted because when you do it, you just throw it away and you think, this is just the thing, this is the way it happened. But you start to think about it more deeply, and you get people ask you great questions like this, and you come up with some answers that hopefully you think are right. So there's a lot of variables in here, but I think they all add up to create this energy, and I humbly agree with you that that's the result that we get, which I'm so proud of and excited about. But yeah, running through the variables. So I'm a really logical person, so initially it made no sense to me that was different to other events, and why would that be the case, and I couldn't figure it out. Over time, experimenting between different venues. Let's start there. So different venues are where we could run events. So we ran events in office spaces. Our London pilot was on like the 10th or 14th floor of a skyscraper in London overlooking the water, but it was in an office. Our first Bristol event, as you'll know because you come to them, is in more of a bar atmosphere. And in Bath, our very first Bath event is in a co-working space. The Bristol one worked better, and lots of people naively will put this down to the fact that beer is available in the venue, which is always helpful, I'm sure. But contrary to popular belief, not the reason why those locations work better than everybody thinks. The real reason that those locations work better, in my opinion, and hopefully the agreement of most people, is that lighting and furniture and acoustics and just general environment are more powerful than most people realize in setting the tone for an event. What happens when we run events in that sort of venue, in the venues that we run our events now, with slightly dimmed lighting slightly more interesting furniture is they feel like they're at home, so their guard drops, and the jacket comes off. You don't invite your friends to the office for a beer because that's weird. You go to the pub with your friends for a beer because that's where you're going to exchange real relationships and conversations that build better relationships. There is, I think, I never remember which book it is, either TED Talks or Talk Like TED. I think it's whichever one Chris Anderson wrote. He talks about the psychology of the timing of a talk being 18 minutes or whatever. And also, I think it's in that book, somebody talks about how humans used to tell stories around a campfire, hence the word fireside chats. And that's when the light was really dim and dark. And I don't know whether this is an evolutionary thing, but people just seem to enjoy being told stories when the lighting is slightly less. And so white lighting doesn't work and more dim lighting does. So that's the boring stuff around venue, but really does set the tone. And I would encourage anybody when thinking about setting up an event to really think carefully about the venue that they use. And the other reason is down to the people. So our age demographic is sub 35. Our membership is agnostic. Anybody, any age can join our membership, but the events are sub 35, primarily to create a safe space for the next generation to network without feeling intimidated. And what that does is once they've walked into the room, they're already naturally nervous because they're waiting for that intimidation to happen. But when the initial hurdle of that is overcome, that creates, if I'm going to get scientific about it, I imagine it creates endorphins, which creates excitement, which creates more fast-moving and more excitable conversations. But as you add more and more people into the mix that have exactly the same reaction, that just starts to multiply. And therefore, all night you've got these really incredible conversations sparking off of one another. Culturally, because they're from a new generation, they react to past in a different way, and that tends to present itself in people wanting to help each other more than expecting help from each other, which I'm sure you've seen previous events. That's the events where I don't want to generalize or stereotype too much, but the events where you'll find lots of old white men in suits, let's say, and I'm allowed to say that because I'll be one at some point, is that there was lots of business card exchanging going on because these guys were brought up during the 70s, 80s, 90s, where that was happening, hardcore sales. It's about relationships now. And so the next generation will react to that. We've all lived through the time of door-to-door salesman, double glazing, on the phone, hardcore sales, and we don't want that anymore. We don't want to be sold to. We want to build relationships to then buy from. And so people will help unconditionally and they'll want to connect with others. So you've got the venue right, you've got the people right, and the culture. And I think the culture is also, and this is where I say kind of you can take things for granted sometimes and overlook the good work you've done. But humbly, I'd say that the brand we've built up does that really well. And because I'm a brand guy, I could go into this for days on end, but everything from the coloring, the typography, the imagery, the iconography, the online experience, the physical experience, every little touch point that somebody comes into touch with when they experience the YENA brand, whether it's our own event directories on a third-party website we don't even control, or whether it's an email I'm sending, or whether it's a tweet, or whether it's a coffee I'm having, all of the things that people will experience when they come into touch with us are considered, either consciously or subconsciously. What I'm wearing that day will be different from maybe if I'm going to have a meeting at the bank. And so all of these things happen, and so you set a precedent before they arrive at you because they feel a certain way. They come into the event and they find other people like them, and so that reinforces the great feeling they have in a venue that also makes them feel at home. And then they get inspired by each other, by the speaker, by everything else that's going on, and excited by the probable chemistry that's happening in the room, which then leaves them with this great feeling at the end, which turns into that vibe that you're talking about. So, yeah, as I said, I'm a logical person, so all of those things I think add up. If I'm doing some maths, there's probably some extra X factor-ish stuff that throws in there, but I'm not too sure what that is. So, yeah.
So you mentioned in the description of that you are one of two who runs over 100 events a year. With that amount of workload and that amount of pressure on you as the figurehead and as the owner, how do you show up each day as the best possible version of you to do what needs to get done for you and your business?
Sure. Okay, so here's the bad news. I don't show up every single day as the best person, best
Surprise,
version of
surprise.
myself.
We're not all perfect.
I'm certainly far from it. And yeah, that's the first thing I think I'd say is that, people put so much pressure on themselves to be incredible. Thanks to social media now, you can paint the most pretty picture of your life, but the reality is far from it. And so here's a perfect example. I've wanted to create a vlog, a weekly vlog from YENA about the stuff we get up to give a very real example. I've called it Diary of a Startup. It doesn't even exist yet. And here's the reality, and that's the reality of it, as I want to create it to create a very real example of what happens in a startup and how things get busy and sometimes too busy, 100-hour weeks or whatever, and how that's not glamorous, it's actually dangerous and so on. The irony is that I haven't even had time to develop that yet and edit the content because I've been too busy. And so lots of people now will someone will have probably had a similar situation, but they'd have found 5 minutes on a weekend, 2 a.m. in the morning, and created a really good looking Instagram post out of that and inspired people to go and also find a 200-hour week. And I'm like, you want to avoid that. Not that I know there's not that many hours in a week before anybody pulls me up on that. But yeah, you see what I mean. So that's the first thing. But how do I do it? I'm learning this all the time. I have no definitive answer, but one thing I've realized over the last 18 months probably is, and this goes against my logical nature, but it is logical when you think about it more, you've experienced it yourself, is to listen to your body and your mind and react to that. I used to, until I changed, procrastinate a lot, and I know lots of people do, and they put pressure on themselves to stop themselves procrastinating, but all that does is it makes them do it more because they're thinking about it more, and so they don't want to do it more.
Yeah.
There are logical ways around this. You've got things like your Eisenhower matrix, which will tell you if it's not urgent, not important, to just throw it off your list. If it's urgent and important, do it straight away, and obviously the other two in between. But then there are non-practical ways, more holistic ways to deal with this, which is if you at some point feel that your brain is wandering off into a different place and you're not focused on work at that time, then why are you doing work? You could listen to your brain, take your mind off of work, indulge yourself in something completely non-work for a bit. Put a Netflix series on, put your PlayStation on, go for a run, kick a ball around, paint a picture, read a book, do what you need to do, whatever is really you, to really invest, relax your mind, and then come back invigorated. Yes, an 8-hour day is a standard thing, but actually, if you can go and do 2-hour stints and then have a 15-minute break, you might be better like that.
Yeah.
Everybody is different, and that's actually why we have a company culture now, even though we're 2 people, and that's not fair because our intern has started recently. So we're actually 3 people temporarily. And that's why he was surprised, and people are generally surprised when I say that we don't have normal working hours. We work on an output-only basis, which means that if somebody's feeling productive, they can work at that time. If they're not, cool. Everybody has work to get done, standard, like anything. I'm saying that this gives them the ability to do no work, but what it does give them the ability to is work when they're at their best. I don't advise people to work at 2 a.m., but if that's when they want to work, they can. And it means they can take breaks as and when they feel better. And the reality is certainly what I've seen in Abby, our second person, obviously, is that the quality of work increases, and actually the staff autonomy increases as well. They take ownership of what they're doing because they know they've got a certain time to get stuff done by. It's not a school mentality anymore. So for me, it's about listening to your body and your mind. I think the other thing that's also quite holistic is about being truly aligned with your job and what you should do for a living. Again, like I say, I think people put too much pressure on themselves to find that. YENA is probably not the thing I'm going to do forever, but right now it's the best thing I could be doing because it ticks all of my boxes from a personality point of view. as we can tell, I'm a talker, and that allows me to do what I do best for a living. I'm a people person. That therefore ticks all those boxes for me. And so it's easy for me to go to work every day because, as I said before, it's actually probably the thing I would do for a living if money wasn't an object. So it is. I know it sounds really really silly when people say this, but it isn't like going to work every day. I just get up and do the stuff I'd probably do. I get up, I help people, lucky enough to get paid for it, just about, and then I go home, and sometimes I'll go home at 9 p.m, sometimes I'll go home at 3 p.m, grab some lunch, start working again, go to the gym, send some emails at 7. It's just about reacting and being adaptive to the way that your mind and your body work, I think.
Mm-hmm. You've used some words in this interview that people might not expect of an entrepreneur, of someone who's so involved in business. Things like holistic and autonomous. And funnily enough, it might not be in the immediate values of YENA, but the way that I see it is that you are bringing people together, and through bringing people together, ultimately you're creating love in the world. And that will sound very hippie and holistic, but that's the way that I see it, is that when people come together and when they have good interactions, there is a form of love there. It's not romantic love, it's not parental love, but it is a form of appreciation of another human being. What I'd like to ask, Ash, is how do you think we can bring more love into the world, more love than what YENA is doing already?
Interesting. It's a very good question. There are some people that I'd definitely love to ask that to. Political leaders, for example. But I think there's going to be confirmation bias here, right? Or not confirmation bias, but just some bias, because I'm always going to think that. But if I'm going to, I think it is about one, being more aligned with what you should be doing for a living, because that in turn creates happier people, and happier people create better relationships. If you're not going home and moaning about work to your partner at the end of the day because you don't have to, then hopefully your partner is happier, and therefore they go to the work that hopefully they love, have better relationships at work, and that has a knock-on effect. So there's that. I think it's also worth thinking about purpose and impact in the work that people do. YENA is a vehicle that allows me to do impact and create a living at the same time. It's not creating a living so that I can use some of that profit to do impact stuff. It's not me taking 5% of profits and donating it. It's by doing what we are paid to do, we are also therefore helping people at the same time. And this is something that a podcast I listened to recently about the founder of Starbucks goes into quite a lot, because they have some very, very deep values within the work that they do, and it's quite admirable, especially helpful to listen to that in light of obviously the recent happenings and the PR that's gone around them.
Yeah.
So all those things add together. So purpose and impact, and how you can deliver that, true alignment with the work that you should be doing. And then I think it's about giving. And this is weird because obviously giving is in a turn a selfish act because it makes you feel good. But giving unconditionally is something that I'm just addicted to for that reason, but also the fact that it helps me, one, from a business and commercial point of view, build up social currency so I can leverage favors later on. But beyond both of those things, it helps people to do better, and therefore they feel great about it. And then it helps me build my reputation, which ticks my, personal growth boxes and narcissism angles. But for them, it's, wow, okay, what a great person. Thank you. Let me do something to help you. And so they'll do that. And so we'll just keep exchanging favors and help all the time. And so I become a greater person, hopefully, as a result, at least in their eyes, and likewise from them. And so collaboration over competition is a really important value to me, and obviously in turn the company. We have competitors, other people have competitors in your workplace. Your workbench, two computers down from you, someone might be competing for the promotion that you want. But actually, if you can find a way to collaborate with these people and create new opportunities, then that's where interesting things happen and hopefully more happiness is formed. So, as I say, my bias is always to go to a business capacity. If you're asking me about general happiness in the world, that's going to be an interesting thing. But work is obviously such a large part of that, because we spend over half our lives in work, depending on your definition of work and life. But if we can fix work, that goes a long way to starting everybody on a better road to happiness, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Good answer.
Thanks.
To bring this back to the start of your journey and almost come full circle, you were talking about your time at school and having the cursed blessing of being a good generalist. And one of the things I'm really passionate about in the work that I'm doing is looking at changing the way we get educated. And I think in order to help people to find their purpose, to do work that they love, to ultimately go and flourish as human beings in the world, I think we need to educate people on this. And I think we need to do it from a much earlier age than we do right now. So with that in mind, if you had a 5-year-old in front of you and you were going to give them advice on how they could live a fulfilled life from that point on, what would you say to them?
I think about this not as much as I will probably in the next decade or so, because obviously, you start thinking about what you might start telling your own children. But I think about this every now and again because of that question. What would I be like as a father at some point? It's still a fair distance away, I imagine, but you think about the actual education system. I had this conversation in the office today, actually, and we were talking about how homeschooling is an interesting approach. There are certain ways in which children will lose out, I imagine, from a socializing point of view, but there are lots of other ways that you gain, because you can take full control over the education of that child and make sure that it's done to the way that you think the world works, as opposed to the way the quote-unquote system sees the world working. It's probably an opportunity that I'll take if I find time or can afford to with children when I have them. But that hopefully frames my answer, which is that I'll give them. I would expect a 5-year-old to, or I would advise a 5-year-old or help a 5-year-old to have way more freedom in the way that they learn, because, be it by nature or nurture or both, they will have passions in certain areas. And my problem is that both parents, unfortunately, probably because of the system and the way they were brought up, but the system, the education system, will define those children, those 5-year-olds, and for the next 10, 13, 14, potentially even 20 years after that, in certain boxes. And they will put them in boxes that are defined by careers and job roles and personality profiles and so on. But these kids, even at 5 years old, I'm not a child psychologist, but I imagine they have passions in certain areas. They might be super passionate about trains, or they might love going to ballet every Monday night, and that might be the thing they tell their parents they really want to do with their life. But that parent, because they weren't exposed to the same opportunities, may turn around and say, "That's great, dear, but let's think about a real job." And that's the thing that really kills me, is that we can name people in these areas of incredible success. If somebody's 5-year-old daughter wants to be a singer and tells her that she should start thinking about a real job, because that's never going to happen, but then turns the radio on afterwards and starts singing along to Beyonce, then what is going on in the world? This is crazy. With the growth of the internet and access to online services, people have a better ability to achieve the things they've ever wanted to, better than any other generation that's ever existed. So there are kids making thousands of pounds a month now playing video games online, and parents are turning around and saying, "Hey, that's not a real job." The reality is that they're getting paid more than you to do this. So who's really made the wrong decision here? I think I'm starting to get into beef mode at the moment, but my answer about what I would tell a 5-year-old is just to explore. Don't feel like they should have to do something because the world tells them to. If they enjoy something, do it more, do it better, see just how good they can get at it, and just, every now and again ask themselves, is this something I'd love to do every day for the rest of my life? Hey, my name is Kelly Slater and I'm one of the most famous surfers in the entire world. At some point, a fair few people, I imagine, turned around and said to him, or her, actually, I don't actually know if it's a guy or a woman now. But, would you get off the board at some point and go and do an office job and actually get paid for doing something normal? Tony Hawk, here's a guy. Okay, so this is another person on the board who I do know. At some point, someone probably turned around and said, are you going to get a real job? Like, running up and down a half pipe isn't really going to get you paid. And obviously he's turned around and proven wrong. And I think, and it is an inherent issue psychologically and generationally. And Tony Hawk's a great example of this, actually. I saw a tweet from him the other day that said that he was on a plane and his skateboard was in the overhead locker, which I think is badass anyway, because he hasn't even put it in a bag. He's just got on the airplane and just thrown it in the overhead locker. And a woman had shouted out to say that she couldn't get her bag out because someone's skateboard was blocking the way. And he stood up as I don't know how old he is now, maybe 55, 60-year-old guy. He's getting on a little bit, at least late 40s. We'll be generous for him. And he stood up and said, oh, that's mine. And she said, wait, this is your skateboard? You ride this thing? And he said, yeah. And she said, are you any good at it? And he said, sometimes. And then just got off the plane. And that's crazy, the fact that she's clearly just assumed that he's not very good because he's just some very tall, skinny, old white guy who, he's far too old to be on a skateboard now. And it's those preconceptions that really destroy the world. So, yeah, I would say if you can, it's very difficult to remove your preconceptions, go and try and find out what they're good at and back them up, and we'll see just how much of a mess they end up in, but it'll be funny to watch.
So, Ash, I'd like to round off with a last couple of questions. But just because of the last questions doesn't mean your answers have to be short or clipped by any means.
Sure.
First of which is, what are you grateful for?
It's going to sound quite hippie, but opportunity. And this is a very Gary Vee-esque thing, I think, to say, but being born is a massive opportunity to start with. And I could go down a super philosophical route here about what being born actually is, and is the universe real, and so on. But that's for another time, I'm sure. But being born, regardless of your thoughts of the universe, is a big opportunity. We are conscious. Great. Okay. Good start. That's nice. You beat another billion or whatever it is sperm to become the one. Awesome. Okay. That's a good start. Then being born, personally for me, luckily enough, into the country that has the second most well-spoken or most spoken language in the world. So that's a great start. It allows me to communicate with more people than the majority of the planet, because English is my first language. Great. I'd love to learn Mandarin. It's going to be way more difficult, I imagine, but let's give it a go at some point, I'm sure. So that's another good start. Then, of course, you've got privilege that you can throw into the mix. So for me, obviously I'm not necessarily from, I wouldn't say a poor background, certainly not middle-class background, but I have enough at the very least to get by. My parents have done everything they can. I've made a crap ton of sacrifices, but I'm not living on a street. So there you go. There's another opportunity. It allows me to go forwards from there. And then, to be ultra practical and skip to, the more subtle things, which are massive at the end of the day, especially right now, I have access to the internet. Yeah. Great. Okay. It gives me access to virtually everybody on the planet, give or take a few countries and continents. Unfortunately, hopefully that changes to give them more opportunity, but it allows me to do what I've done, which is build a now globally recognized brand from my bedroom and a laptop. And that's, huge opportunity. So I'm grateful for the ability to do all of those things with very little repercussion or barrier of entry. I'm grateful to be born in that time, because I'm sure it would have been much more difficult to do stuff 100 years ago. Luckily, as I say, being born into the circumstance I am gives me a greater ability than a lot of people would have had 100 years ago. But I'm interested to see what the next 100 years looks like, and if we can give everybody a level playing field to work from. But yeah, opportunity is what I'm grateful for, I think.
Earlier on, you were joking about the inner narcissist that we all have, and ultimately we're all looking to make ourselves better. And I think ultimately we all want to leave a legacy. You can call it narcissism, or you can just call it aspiration and wanting to make an impact. And that's another thing that you've talked about a lot. Because ultimately, one day we're all going to be gone. I'm going to be gone. You're going to be gone. When you're gone, what legacy do you want to leave behind?
So here's where I will get a little bit, not philosophical, but slightly scientific, actually, to be fair. So what's the year now? 2018. 2042 is the year of the singularity. So the questions that are coming up, that have come up for the last 1,000 years about when you're gone, are actually getting more and more relative now. So, and I say that as a science fiction fan, but of course you've got, the exponential curve of technology, and supposedly, for those who don't know what the singularity is, in the year 2042, that's the prediction at when humanity and technology can only come to one conclusion, which is to merge and essentially live forever. Transcendence is a great film. Watch it and you'll be able to understand what I mean. After the caveat of we might actually live forever, David. So, and then obviously that gives birth to the question of would you want to, which is way deeper. What legacy would I want to leave behind? I think I would. I'd want to have just done good. Without delusions of grandeur. I don't necessarily want massive statues of myself somewhere, or that would be cool. It would be cool. But I'd love to build a legacy where people remember me in a positive light. That's probably, if I'm getting quite meta about it, it's probably born from a hatred for conflict. I hate negativity, and I can't stand arguments or anything like that. So if I'm looking at that as the worst thing that could ever happen to me, which is for people to not like me or to get into arguments or disagreements, then actually that's why the most perfect outcome for me is to be as far away from that as possible and have everybody like me and remember me in a positive light. So yeah, I think for me, I'd love to just be able to, every single person I come into contact with, I'd love to be able to do something great for them, whether it's tiny, like open a door, or whether it's huge, like create a career. I'd love to be able to do all of that so that, hopefully by the time I'm gone and passed away, people can turn around and go, what a great guy. That's what I'd like to do. And hopefully that, explains the both impactful nature and the purpose-driven, want to help people, but at the same time also explains the selfishness of that, because the reality is I want to do all those things probably because I want to be remembered as good, and that's a very selfish thing. Again, very topical. Had that conversation today about Bill Gates recently giving another $1 billion to obviously try and cure malaria, which is incredible. And it begs the question as to why. You've got one hand, you've got the skeptics that will talk about tax purposes and wanting to be a very okay, so tax purposes, they're the skeptics. Then you've got the optimists, which are, he's making all this money because he wants to save the world. And then you've got the realists that will go, probably a bit of both. and it's just great that it's happening. And so that's pretty much where I see myself, is there's the logic and then there's the nicety. And so, yeah, just a good guy is the short answer to that question, I think. Yeah. It's too early to ask me stuff about family and stuff, because I won't leave him behind. But yeah, just a good guy.
We all just want to be a good guy.
Hopefully. And there's some people that might not, Donald Trump. But yeah, I'm sure he thinks he's being a good guy, and that's the problem. But yeah.
So I've really welcomed your authenticity in this interview, not being afraid to admit that we do have a darker side to our humanity. We do have the narcissism, we do have the selfish intentions, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't live with that coexisting with higher virtues of impact, purpose, service. And this notion of authentic and what it means to be authentic has really been kind of capturing me over the past couple of years. And it's funny, when you look into the roots of the word authentic and you look all the way into the Greek roots of authentic, the Greek root of the word authentic is author. And so to be authentic is to be the author of your life. And that's how I see being authentic. That's why I've got the Author Your Life podcast. That's why I now teach a whole philosophy and message of being the author of your life. For me, that's what being authentic means. For you, Ash, what does the word authentic mean?
It comes down to values. For me, it's knowing what your values are and then living them. Simple as that. Everybody's values will change, and it's certainly not about rewriting your values according to what the world expects your values to be. If your values are to be, certainly in my case, a contrarian, I am naturally, and so rather than fight against that and try to fit in, I've just gone, you know what, that's me, and I'm going to make the most of that core value. If your other value is then great, live that value. And if your core value is to help people because or to be slightly selfish and build a personal brand because you want to be well known, then great, live that too, and find out what put that all in a Venn diagram and find the middle point, and that's where you sit, and be that person all the time. That is what I think is annoyingly people are taken away from that because of things like social media. I love social media, so I'm not anti. I think it has the ability to help people actually increase their authenticity if used in the right way. But the problem that brings, probably because of massive insecurity from a huge number of the population, is that means that people are scared of being authentic, and therefore put out this, bringing us really full circle to the first part of the conversation, putting this false persona out about themselves online, which is then not lived up to in person. And that creates dangerous situations. People feel pressure constantly, and it puts them under pressure and causes stress and can lead to depression and so on. And that's really not good. So I think it's, just discover who you are by exploring, which we've touched on in the conversation today. Find out what those values are. They don't have to remain the same forever. If you find a new value because you are continually exploring, then great. Add that to your repertoire and become that person. Build that into your personal brand. Build that into your career decisions in your life, in your business, in your work, in your relationships, and be truly you. Because if you can find your values and be truly you, then you will find a job that you love. You'll find a partner that you get on with and will love you, I imagine. I'm not very experienced with that, but logically that works. And to put all of this into perspective, since I've started doing this myself, I'm just happier than I ever have been. And I remember not being that way at school and college and trying to fit in with everybody, but actually enjoying the experience most when I was just me. And so that's why I actually feel sorry for people that don't feel like they have to follow a crowd. Although, if your true you is to fit in, then great, do that. I'm going to say that. I'm a contrarian. That's my value. So yeah, it gets quite deep. But yeah, find your values and live them.
Excellent. Powerful note to round off on. You mentioned social media briefly there, and social media is a positive force. So for anyone who's been listening to this who is an entrepreneur, they're thinking about being an entrepreneur, they're thinking about being an entrepreneur, and they've resonated with some of the message and some of the lessons and experience that you've shared, where would you direct them to find out a little bit more about yourself and, of course, by extension, YENA?
Sure. My favorite social platform is probably where they can reach me most easily, which is on Twitter. The reason it's my favorite, just to quickly explain, is that there's no real barrier of entry. Facebook is kind of private for me. It's where I have all my friends and my family. And LinkedIn does create false personas around certain people and just puts barriers up, really, mainly because of the user experience. So Twitter is where I'm at. Find me at the Ash Phillips on Twitter. Again, sounds like delusions of grandeur, but it's just because at Ash Phillips was taken. I really want it. Their account is dead, and I really want to have it, but they won't give it to me. Thanks, Twitter. But yeah, at the Ash Phillips, that's me on Twitter, and then at YENA Global on pretty much every platform, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Just search YENA Global and you'll find it. The website's just yena.co.uk. That might change soon. Now we're in Melbourne. I've got to find a new domain name. Please nobody buy yena.com. I'm trying to buy it from somebody at the moment. But yeah, any questions that anybody has, I'm all ears, and I tweet all hours. So yeah, just tweet me and I'll be more than happy to answer.
Brilliant. Well, Ash, thank you very much for coming on the podcast and for sharing what I feel was a very, very realistic version of the journey. Warts and all, and saying some of these things aren't easy. I don't have all the answers. Sometimes I'm not that good at stuff. So I'd like to thank you for really coming on with that openness and that vulnerability to say, you know what, I'm not perfect and I'm not even close, but this is what I've learned through that experience. So thank you very much for coming on and sharing that message.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it hugely if you could head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the podcast. With your review, please be as honest and detailed as you can be. Because with honest and detailed feedback, that helps me to adapt and grow this podcast to most serve you, the listener. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you aren't going to miss any of the future episodes that we've got lined up for you. Until next time, remember that you are the author of your life. You hold the pen, and you can write whatever script you want for yourself. So go out today and write yourself a beautiful story.